Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we're going to be talking a little bit of a topical conversation for what happens when you are the stronger alliance / alliances or group, and you are limiting the weaker, or let's just say lower powered alliances from being able to essentially play the game in some aspects. And I'm going to give a really good example here. And I also want to point out before we start, we're in SSS 1-8. And this is not a slight. This is, as always, right? This is using an example from an exhibit that we are able to witness in real time and talk about what the pros and cons are of doing these. Bearing in mind as well that anyone and everyone can play the game how they see fit. Right, so that's first and foremost. Now, for those of you that may not have some history here on SSS 1-8, let me first show you some of the kingdoms that are involved in this, or some of the kingdoms in this server. So we have 2, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Now, in this, you have some. Again, you have decent, really good, I would say, activity. And if we take a look at alliance power, you can see that you have TM and TA kind of on top. And then you have GOAT and GRZ as 3 and 4, right? Both of TA and TM, pretty even power, which is nice to see. I actually like seeing something like that. Because, again, they're kind of on their side. And then you have the GOAT and GRZ, and they're on their side. So you kind of have this 2v2 that they've been trying to elicit, if you will, to make happen, make a reality throughout this season so far. However, some of what the noticeable differences are is the power disparity. You have essentially two 4.6 billion alliances, and you have one that's at almost 3.2, one that's at 2.8. So even if you take the 3.2, you're still looking at a 1.4 bill difference. If you take the 2.8, you're looking at, 1.8? Yeah, 1.8 billion difference, right? So you're essentially almost at a 2 bill difference for one of them, and then at a 1.6 bill difference for the other. I mean, that's a pretty wide gap. Now, if we look at personal power, for example, you can see that GRZ and GOAT do have the 1 and 3rd strongest player, right? It's not as though Burning is that far off from Barcode, and it's not as though Ghost is that far off from Immortal, right? They're pretty close. And then you have second Barcode here at 5, Immortal being here. I mean, again, right, this is a little wider if you're talking 91 to 78, where you're looking at 13, 12 mil. But if you keep going down the board, you'll see TATM, right, there's another GOAT, TATM, right, there's a GRZ mixed in, right, that's 5 on one side, 6, TMTA. I mean, you kind of get the picture that if sometimes the power, alliance power, doesn't necessarily always tell the full story. Sometimes if you have to kind of go through, like, for example, I've gone through the top 200 players or individual players here, and the majority is on the TATM side. I think it came out to like 66% or 2/3 of the top 200 players were a part of their alliances, and then the 1/3 was distributed between GRZ and GOAT. Now, maybe that's changed since I last did the data pool, but however, what I want to show you today is something that we're seeing. So it was told to me that by a few people who said, hey boss, once zone 3 and the level 3 passes open here in SSS 1-8, it's going to be TATM versus GRZ GOAT. So in theory, right, the 2v2, even though there's a pretty decent power disparity, right, that sounds kind of fair when you think about 2v2, but again, when you do a deep dive, you kind of start leaning in that, it is a pretty unfair matchup, right? When you're thinking about power-wise, the top 200 player distribution. But the thing that really gets me, and this is what I want to talk about, and again, I want to reiterate, this is not me saying how dare TM, how dare TA, but I want to talk about the reality of choices and what those, I don't want to say repercussions, but what the effects of those choices can be. So if you think about, and this is pretty consistent for what we've been seeing in a lot of the Season 1+ Merge Kingdoms, is that the moment that the pass is open, you end up having the players that are just sending their troops out to fight it out in the middle, try and push each other's gates, and then while they try and build at the same time. So in this scenario, you can see that you have TM up here, they're building. You have TA over here, they're building. But then you have GRZ and GOAT here at their respective passes, and they're not building. But if we take a deeper look, which kind of gets me into my point, is you can see that there's a standoff, right? And then if we zoom in a little bit more, you can see here that it's... Hang on, we're going to get it. There we go. Hang on, is that it? Nope, it's not it. Nah, we'll take it. We'll take this one. So you have, again, a lot of TM players, and then you have a lot of GRZ players. But it's a standoff. And so now let's look at the other gate, and then I'm going to make a couple points that are really going to connect the dots. So if we zoom in, you'll see here that on this side you have TA and GOAT, right? A little bit less players. I'm sure there was more at one point as well. The reason I'm saying this is because you have to now ask the question, which is, do you think... Oh, did they just cap theirs? Look at that. Oh, God, just capped their passive. That's cool. So now you have to say... Ooh, hang on, before I get to my point, I'm just curious if... Let's see what's happening. Oh, they're not. I thought they'd go through immediately, and I'm sure they'll drop a flag in a moment. But the point I want to make here is that you have to weigh... When you're in a kingdom like this, where you have the top two alliances that are just, again, kind of running this mega alliance structure where you're just so much farther ahead and they basically try and recruit the strongest players as their tactic, the mindset has to be, well, if we want to keep these two alliances healthy and active, and arguably any more beyond those two, how do we create an environment in which we can nurture and hopefully bring about the most amount of PvP possible? Because you have to think about it from the TATM side, which is that I imagine most of their players, because it would just be weird if they didn't, why would they not want as much PvP as possible? Right? Most of their players are T5, high T4. They probably are already maxed out Castle 25, right? They're probably just working on maxing out tech at this point. They're pretty much near endgame, with some of them being endgame. So when you get to this point, it's less about developing your account as much as it is about fine-tuning and kind of being ready for war, right? Now, you're kind of, it's like you've maxed out your World of Warcraft, account, level 70, whatever it may be, and now, that's the whole thing you usually hear from people, right? That's what I always heard when I attempted to play WoW, is people said, well, you got to max your account out first, then you can start kind of really enjoying the game. And so it's very similar in that sense as well. But now you look at, okay, well, if we want to try and elicit the most amount of PvP, and we want to try and get this to a point where everyone can enjoy as much as possible, do you think that with this power disparity that you have, that the best approach is, well, let's just go and attack them immediately at their gate and fight it out and not let them come out? No, it's not. You're basically camping the spawn point. Like, what are you expecting at this point? Now, again, I don't know what they're expecting. I'm speaking generally, universally here. It doesn't make sense. If you want to get, you're going through all this effort to set up this 2v2, which, again, they had to have done, right? If you think about TA Team, they would have had to have conversations with GRZ and GOAT to set up this 2v2, right? Because that's what I'm hearing. Unless that's a lie, and if that's the case and that's not the truth, someone's more than welcome to let me know in the comments down below, and then some of the points I'll make might be moot. However, if that is the case, which again it appears to be, why would you camp the spawn point, which is the level 3 pass, essentially the choke point that allows for them to get in? Instead, let's consider a different approach. Why not say, you know what, guys, we're going to split the map in half, and we're going to allow everyone to build out to the half line. Or let's say, hey, we'll allow everyone to build out to the dragon. Or, again, if you're going to, because they're kind of top and bottom, it would have been easier if they came up from over here, as an example. And I don't know who this is. Okay, so that's God as well. Right, but in this situation, you would say something like, okay, well, let's split this in half. You guys build out the top half. We'll build out the bottom half. Or something like this, right? Build out the bottom half. They'll build out the top half. You build everything out, and then you fight. Don't you think that would allow, for one, more players to actually play the game further into a zone 3, which I would have to imagine that the players would be appreciative of that because they're not just immediately getting blocked out of zone 3. Number 2, it would allow for them to build flags. It would allow for them to potentially, I mean, obviously not necessarily take a behemoth, right? But they could build flags out. And on top of that, they could build things like keeps. They could build barricades, right? So you're enjoying another aspect of the game in this type of like no rush type situation where you're being able to set up some defenses. And then 3, after everyone's done building, then you fight it out. Because now you're establishing a level of comfortability by allowing more people to build into the zone, therefore leading to number 4, which you're going to get more PvP out of it. Right? Now, sure, maybe the same end result is going to end up happening, where TATM will still end up pushing them back, but at least you will be able to have a higher percentage chance of having more people participating and potentially more multiple engagements throughout Zone 3 until they get pushed back. And so, for me, that's kind of now, bear in mind, even though, yes, that's the way I view it, if you're trying to get the most PvP out of your current situation that pertains to this kingdom as possible, it also does not mean that what they're doing is wrong. What we're talking about is weighing out the pros and cons of if you're in a kingdom that is already lacking and you are fighting tooth and nail to try and get some PvP, as much PvP out of it as you can, because maybe you're just trying to starve off boredom. If you're looking at the two options, right, and there is a third option we're going to talk about here in a moment. If you're only weighing these two options, it's a no-brainer that you would not do what TM and TA are doing. It is the only logical conclusion that I could come to, and I would have to imagine other people have thought about this as well. But now, let me address point number 3. Point number 3, and this is something that I've mentioned in this kingdom before, is that why don't you just split TA and TM? And let's zoom in on the leaderboard so I can give you an example here. Let's say you go in and you say, okay, well, we're going to pair TM with GRZ, and then we'll pair TA with GOAT. Now, if you think about it, this is a lot more fair of a fight. There's nothing wrong. Like, you have to think about this end goal. If your end goal, once again, as we reiterate, is to get as much PvP out of the situation as possible, why would you not put yourselves in a position that can present itself as fair or as fair as possible, as close in power as possible, and as balanced as a fight as possible? We just did a video where I showed off, where is it? Hang on, I gotta see it real quick. Where I showed off SSS 113 doing a 3v3, and their power is pretty darn balanced. Like, there was maybe a 300 to 400 mil difference between the strongest alliance in that group of 6, and then the lowest strength alliance in that group of 6. And it's glorious. They're getting a lot of PvP out of it. And that's really what you're trying to enjoy. In Call of Dragons, the most enjoyable part of the game, arguably, is the open field PvP. That's what it is. And so trying to get as much out of that as you can, right? Now, bear in mind, like I said, this is my view on if you're trying to meet this goal. In this specific type of kingdom. If you're in another kingdom where it's just healthy all around, you got multiple active alliances, sure, maybe you take the approach of, okay, well, we don't really care about having this 50-50. We're just going to push you on your gate because you're probably going to be able to push us back. You've already done it. We've been locked in our past. We've pushed you back. I mean, again, there are different approaches to it. And sometimes different situations can elicit different reactions and actions in and of itself. But in this situation, that would be my third option, is why not split these up and then fight it out? Like what's going to happen? You guys aren't going to be friends after you end up fighting? If that's the case, how fragile of a union it must be, right? I mean, again, you can make easy arguments here. And it's not meant to isolate or to split TA and TM and now all of a sudden they're just going to fight against each other forever. No, you're doing it for a temporary amount of time because there is a need that is not necessarily being fulfilled, right? So it's more of like, oh, hey, let's have some friendly competition with each other. That could be awesome. And that's the approach you take. And then at the end of the season, you guys wait for your next matchup, and you team up and you go at it again. And if you think about it, you'll probably get more experience out of the fight doing something like this as a third option compared to what you're doing now. Right? Because really it's not really any competition. You're pushing them back, Sure, they might have some pushes here and there, but you're going to be consistently pushing them for probably the foreseeable, remainder of the season, unless you back off and you allow them to build out, and then you push them again. But it's just to point out that there are different ways to approach certain situations, and maybe some of you that are in other kingdoms might be facing something like this. You may want to potentially reconsider your approach if you're trying to get as much PvP out of the situation as possible. I'll give you an example as my very last point. When I was running the project in 65, we did a video kind of explaining everything. So for those that are interested, there's a link on my Discord as well, and maybe I'll include one in the description if I remember. But when we were there, the whole idea was once we got to Zone 3, if there wasn't enough, right, we had 9 alliances starting out, and the approach was, right, through merges and other things that may happen along the way, if there was not enough of other independent alliances, we would just fight amongst ourselves. Like, it was the only logical thing to do. So the idea of having a lot of alliances is it gives you a lot of flexibility in being able to do those types of things. So we can set up 3v3s or 3v4s or 2v2v2s. And we can do all of that in a friendly way, where no one's thinking about it in, oh my God, the family is attacking each other. No, we're doing it because we understand that there is a need that needs to be fulfilled. And there are times where you have to set up these types of things like war games, and you might have to fight with your other family alliances, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. You do this in a friendly competition way. So anyways, that's my thoughts on this. Again, I'd love to hear what you think, right? Let me pose the question. Are you of the mindset where, hey, there's nothing wrong with TA and TM's approach? Let them do their thing. If GRZ and GOAT can't push them back, well, that's on them. Or are you of the mindset where, it kind of makes sense of, hey, let's let them build out, let them fight, even if it ends up being the same way, you're still going to get a lot more PvP out of it, and it'll at least extend the length of enjoyment for TA and TM, and I would imagine for GRZ and GOAT for a lot longer compared to what the approach is or what is being done right now. Or do you fall in a different camp, and maybe you have a different idea? I'd love to hear. So let me know in the comments down below. That is going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.